Okay, I need to remind everybody that this is live streamed and it started at 1:30. Turn on and use your mics when you're called on, and make sure you turn them off when you're not, so they don't pick up your voice. And you have a travel voucher, so make sure you get those in today so we can get that taken care of. I'd like to welcome Patrick Penn to the committee today. He is replacing Representative Williams, who is out of the country. So we'll start with the work from home audit, and Macy's going to present the audit.
All right. Okay. Just wanted to make sure it was on. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, my name is Macy Smith, and I will present the audit assessing the impact of permanent work-from-home options. Matt Etzel was the manager, and Tanner Rohr and Holly Alker were team members. This audit answers two questions. First, how many state employees could potentially work from home, all or part of the time? And then second, what impact would permanent work from home options have on state costs, hiring, and productivity? At a high level, it was estimated about 45% of the state workforce could potentially be working from home all or part of the time. And then there would be a benefit to hiring, limited impact on productivity, and mixed impact on costs. So I'll get to those findings in more detail later, but first I want to give you some general background on how the state's workforce looks as it relates to working from home. For our audit work, we identified 81 state agencies, boards, or commissions under the executive branch of the state government. And just to be clear, these were executive branch agencies only. We did not audit the judicial branch, the legislative branch, or state universities. The 81 agencies we looked at range in size from a couple of employees to about 2,000 people. These agencies also serve a wide variety of functions, from corrections to wildlife management to licensure. And also, among these 81 agencies, there are a wide variety of professions. So professions like historians, attorneys, doctors, law enforcement, accountants, or facilities management. So as I talk about working from home, this wide variety of agency functions and purposes, and then even the variety among positions within one agency is important to keep in mind. There isn't going to be a one-size-fits-all approach to working from home. Some state jobs are better suited for working from home than others. Now, first I want to explain the two types of work from home arrangements. First, there's full-time work from home, and this is just what it sounds like. This is where the employee has their office at home and they work from home full-time. The second is what is called a hybrid arrangement. Many times, this means an employee must work in the office a certain number of days a week, maybe 2 or 3, and then on those other days, they can work from home. In the state of Kansas, there are no statutes governing work from home for state agencies. However, the Department of Administration instructs agencies that they must have an official work from home policy if they offer it as an option. A majority of agencies do have a work from home policy, but some agencies don't allow work from home options for their employees, and they don't need a policy. If you would like more details about those policies, you can look on page 3 of the report. So with that background in mind, I'm going to get into our main findings, which begin on page 4 of the report. Again, our first audit question was, how many state employees could potentially work from home all or part of the time? To complete this work, we asked the 81 agencies I mentioned to provide us with staffing information for their agencies. Specifically, we asked them to report to us the number of employees in their agency, how many currently work from home, and how many potentially could work from home. All 81 reported back to us. What I am reporting to you today is at the aggregate statewide level. I won't be delving into specific agency numbers, but if you're interested in that, you can find individual agency responses on page 13, and that's Appendix B. If you're following along still, I'm on page 5. In total, In total, agencies reported to us that there are about 18,000 employees working for them. Of those 18,000 employees, about 30% are already working from home in either a hybrid capacity or full-time. That 30% breaks out to 19% working in a hybrid capacity plus 11% working from home full-time. So again, that 30% is how many employees are currently working from home. We also asked agencies how many additional employees could work from home going forward. Agencies estimated that an additional 15% of employees could potentially work from home going forward. That is about 1,500 additional employees, most of which would be hybrid, so about 1,000. So in all, we estimate about 45% of state employees could work from home either full-time or in a hybrid capacity. Something of note here, these are the numbers that the agencies self-reported to us. However, we did set up a couple of backstops to make sure what was being reported to us was reasonable. For example, we requested a list of every employee for those 81 agencies from the Department of Administration. We looked at those position titles as well as position descriptions to find a ballpark number of how many positions could work from home. We also asked the agencies to classify their employees into 3 different categories related to tasks, and then took that categorization and related it to what type of tasks could reasonably be work from home tasks. So based on this work, the estimates agencies provided us seemed reasonable. Okay, I'm going to move into the second question. And that second question was, what impact would permanent work from home options have on state costs, hiring, and productivity? We gathered information from several sources, and this work is described on page 6 of the report. We conducted a literature review of academic studies and different government reports and audits. We spoke with other states. We reviewed answers from the 81 agencies about what they perceived to be the benefits and barriers of employees working from home. Then we conducted more in-depth interviews with 7 state agencies, and those 7 agencies were the Kansas Department for Children and Families, the Kansas Departments of Health and Environment, Labor and Revenue, then the Kansas Historical Society, and finally the Kansas Office of the State Bank Commissioner. We chose these agencies because they were a mix of large and small agencies and because they represented about 40% of state employees. Overall, we found that permanent work from home options could help the state hire and retain staff, could have limited impact on productivity, and could have a mixed impact on costs. So first, I'll talk to you about hiring and retaining more staff, and this starts on page 7. State agency officials we spoke to told us that working from home has increased the talent pool for hiring and that they have seen less staff turnover since they began offering work from home arrangements. This was also echoed in the reports and research we reviewed. Some of the reasons this may be the case is that for employees, having the option of working from home is seen as a benefit. Additionally, agencies are able to hire people from different regions and backgrounds. So a couple of examples of how this played out. The Department of Labor was able to hire someone in Dodge City, so 300 miles away from Topeka, as an attorney. And then State of Michigan officials told us that they had a specialized position that had been open and vacant for 5 years. When they made it a work from home position, they told us that they were finally able to hire someone. Now I'm going to move into talking about the productivity aspect of this audit. This starts on page 8. Again, we found that working from home appears to have a limited impact on productivity. First, I want to lead with the fact that productivity is difficult to measure. Agency officials we spoke to also told us that it was challenging to find ways to measure how work from home impacts productivity across a variety of jobs. So, as an example, if you have someone whose job has narrow duties, like maybe they handle telephone calls, a quantifiable productivity measure is going to be the number of calls handled each hour. That is very straightforward. But if you have a position like maybe a budget analyst, they may have a variety of tasks to complete within a given month, and then those tasks may also change depending on where they sit in the fiscal year. Measuring that position's productivity becomes more challenging. Agency officials we spoke to said they use things like employee performance, higher staff retention rates, fewer sick days used, and feedback from direct managers to help them measure productivity. So then, 4 of the state agencies told us that working from home had a positive impact on productivity. They cited fewer sick days used, more time to complete work instead of traveling, and increased employee happiness leading to better employee performance. The remaining 3 agencies told us they saw no changes in productivity with their current work-from-home policies. Then, when we talked to state officials in Michigan and Arizona, they told us they hadn't seen any changes in productivity. When we reviewed reports and research in our literature review, those items reported out that remote workers are equally, if not more productive than their on-site counterparts. So these findings were in part linked to employees taking fewer sick days and fewer breaks than their in-office counterparts. But I do want to caveat something here related to the research. There are several factors that affect productivity. These would include job role, employee characteristics, and employee preferences. Not everyone wants to work from home. Some employees aren't a good fit for working from home. And finally, some jobs are not a good fit for working from home. A good example of this comes from the Kansas Historical Society, which has positions that are responsible for handling artifacts. If you move those positions to at-home positions, they would not be productive because they can't handle artifacts at home. Finally, I want to talk about some of the short-term cost increases and its intersection with office space. There are some short-term costs and potential savings. Costs might include things like laptops and other technology to support working from home. Agencies told us they had paid for these things either within their existing budgets or within ARPA funds. As far as cost savings, the reports and research we reviewed, as well as state officials from Michigan and Arizona, said that there were significant cost savings to be found from reducing office space. For example, in Arizona, they reported saving around $1.2 million by moving the state's Medicaid program to virtual offices. But in Kansas, there has not been a major reduction in office space. There have been limited reductions, but not huge. Keep in mind, Arizona and Michigan have been offering work from home for longer and have been directing efforts at increasing their work from home workforce and decreasing office space. When we talked to state agencies, there were a couple of factors affecting reducing office space in Kansas. The first being that agencies are hesitant to make major changes. There is caution over concerns that the state's work from home policy may change in the future and require more in-person work. If they don't have the office space, that could be problematic. The second factor is that some state agencies lease their office space. These leases are often for long periods of time, and breaking these types of leases could cost the state a lot of money. And now with that, my presentation is concluded, and I'm happy to stand for questions.
Okay, committee, any questions or comments? Representative Francis. I wanted to call you.
That's all right, Sean. I just wanted to know, as you reviewed the references that you reviewed at the very beginning, I noticed that the earliest one was 2013, and then 2 of the 5 were from 2022 and 2023. Do you think, as you reviewed that information, that working from home, the entire concept has evolved and changed through COVID?
So I'm going to say we didn't look at that particular aspect. I don't want to answer that specifically, but I will say the research seems to build on itself and kind of work together.
One more question. And then I'm trying to remember exactly what you talked about. You know, we've got some individuals that work from home almost 100%, some people that don't work from home. How did you look at the hybrid thing? One of the things I hear often recently is that working from home is a great benefit, and it can be done effectively, but you also have to have that connectedness with the organization, kind of a team building type thing. Did you have any conversations with any of the department heads about the need for maybe working at home 2 or 3 days a week and 2 days solid in the office?
So, of course, policies vary across agencies, but as we talked to some of them, that was one of the concerns, was making sure that employees were connected, and that's also in the research too, that that people are considering that.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Representative Probst.
I don't really have a question, but I'd sure like it if the legislature could find a way to work from home.
I apologize. I called on Representative Probst because I was talking to him last week about kind of where the direction of where the new employers and the new employees are going, and he had some pretty good comments, so I was hoping he would chime in on that.
It wouldn't be a question for the auditors necessarily, but I guess to that point, I do think we did have a nice conversation about that last week, and I think information like this is useful as we develop policy, because I think a lot of us have an idea, somewhat antiquated ideas about how work ought to work, and we probably ought to get our policies in line with what the employee expectations are. And people are basically making decisions about how they're going to work and where they're going to work based on how it works in their lives. And I think the era of saying you're going to do this or else is probably over, and we would all be wise to recognize that.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Senator Tyson.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. As I was listening, you said that the dollar amount was great. Is there any estimate at all that you can give us for the buildings being empty, what costs we're incurring as a result of so many employees working from home?
We did not delve into that for this particular audit.
Do you have any estimates on the number of people that are, like, in the department? Maybe the secretary could speak to it, but the number of people that are actually in the building. I know, well, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Senator Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With regard to working from home, when we're actually in session, or any questions asked about whether or not those people who are working from home might be, sometimes we need rapid access to some of the people for answering questions or dealing with problems. It sounds like some of these folks may be able to work from home pretty much all the time, but is there a contingent that you would anticipate that would also have to come back during session and then could return to their normal flexibility during the off-session time period?
Are you talking about just state employees or legislative employees?
Yeah, of all the different people that you polled for this.
So as we talk to different agencies, we kind of let them kind of help us understand what's appropriate for their agencies, and they have an idea of that, and they are considering the folks we talk to were considering job role and stuff like that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right. So I was kind of surprised on the productivity part, because I've been talking to several companies that stated that, yes, they were very productive. Like the work at home worked really well at first, but then people kind of got complacent and got used to doing other things than their job. and they're less productive, and they're doing everything they can to bring them back into the office, not successfully because of some of the reasons that that Representative Probst was talking about, so it's hard to get them back once they've been gone. But, so that's good to know that we're not seeing that. And hopefully, if we could figure out a way that more people can work from home, we can shed some office space and save some dollars, because I know that's one of our, real estate's one of our largest expenses, and maybe we can get some of these buildings back on the tax rolls for the city of Topeka. That's just my 2 cents there. I don't see any other questions for the auditor, so we'll move on. There are representatives from the administration, KDOT, KDHE, and Revenue and State Bank Commissioner are available for questions if anyone has questions for them. Senator Tyson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Whichever one of you would like to field this, it's not going to be a simple question. If you look at the graph in the back, or the chart in the back on page 13, well, let me pick on DCF, Children and Families. Almost every one of these, I've had constituent problems, and they cannot get a hold of people. And if I start telling you the latest one, it resulted in a death. So is that the state's fault? No. But were we available to help this family? No. So I have concerns. I have telecommuted off and on since 2016. I have no problem with people telecommuting, but we have to make sure that they are available and doing their jobs. And I can name every one of these agencies that the proportion of the number of workers with the total staff working from home currently, and then the number that you want to increase to, those are the majority of agencies that it is critical, as Senator Thompson said, we've got to have the resources and be available. Any one of you want to address that? Administration, you're not one of them.
And don't hurt each other fighting over the microphone. Come on up and state your name and thank you.
Hi, Janet Stanek, KDHE Secretary. I would just say, to your point, when I came to the agency, we were in the midst of rampant COVID. There were many more people working remotely and so forth. Quickly, we have adjusted that. People that need to be on the phones or have a backup to phones or a succession plan of who's going to pick up when someone's not there has been put in place. So we've taken great efforts to do that, to that particular question, if that's the only question you want me to address. But I understand and appreciate what you're saying.
Mr. Chairman. Thank you. My concern is that we don't have the ability or the knowledge or to manage remote workers. And that's my fear. I am all for it. I think it's wonderful. I think it could save the state money, but we have to be able to succeed when we move in that direction.
If I could make a comment, and I'll just use my own agency, as noted, DFA, Department of Administration, maintains that we have to have a policy, so each individual agency has their own policy that's adopted from DFAs, and then from there, every employee that requests to work remote has to fill out a form. I would say that not everybody works remote in my agency at all, even though that number looks large. There are just some jobs you can't have work remote. And even if the jobs are conducive to remote work, we have more of a 3 in, 2 max out of office. So at any given time, there's not everybody's out of an agent. It's a rotational type of thing in many cases. We have so many different divisions, plus we have a lot of bureau directors and things like that. They are all responsible for managing their own workforce. I'm sure not managing every one of their areas, but I would tell you that I trust that because we have been so focused on making sure that this works, so that we can take advantage where we're able to reap some of the benefits that were outlined, and that where it's not working, or we just say, I'm sorry, but that, I've turned away employees that come in and want a job, and some of them high level, and say, well, I really need remote work, and I just can't do it sometimes. And so, to your point, that might be a loss, but I will tell you, who's managing the agency, and that's my decision. And so I guess that's just my preference on how we're going to decide who's going to be on site and who's not. But I haven't felt like we're in a position ever where we've run into no availability session. Everyone knows session's a whole nother game, depending on what your role is. I hope that helps a little bit.
So I will raise this other concern too, that security. We have a ding, the state has a ding for information technology and security issues, and working remotely raises concern of security. I'm not saying don't move forward. I'm saying that we move forward cautiously and diligently so that we are not putting us more in, our constituents more in harm's way.
Good point. Thank you.
President Probst.
I do think, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do think in this conversation it's important to pause a moment and recognize that productivity was never 100% when everybody was working in an office either. There's a lot of screwing around that goes on in an office. So let's not pretend that just because people are doing work at home that they were suddenly massively productive in offices. I know a lot of people, probably at one point in my life, myself included, who spent a lot of time in office not doing a lot of hard work.
Senator Thompson.
Thank you. And that's a very good point. I think if COVID taught us anything, it's that habits are developed and that expectations have changed because there's so many more people who now believe that, you know, they want to work from home because they can work in their PJs until 1 in the afternoon and then run out to the grocery store or something like that. And then it gets very, very difficult to bring them back into the office once those habits have developed. And so I think caution is of paramount importance, you know, when we determine these on an agency basis. You know, who can we really allow to be at home? And you know, obviously, work productivity is very, very important, but you also have to consider, will you ever be able to pull that person back into the office? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Playing a little tennis here, back to Representative Probst.
I'll make this and then I will stop. There's a lot of imagery we use and a lot of the language we use here about people in, you know, sleep until noon or in pajamas, but we also have to recognize the reality that we all know exists with childcare. Part of the desire to work from home deals with childcare. And if we actually have a crisis situation in this state, and every state, frankly, so part of the desire around working from home is to make sure that people can work and care for their children, and if they need to take breaks during the day to get their children to school or activities, I think that we have to think about that as well.
Okay, see no further questions. We're good. We'll move on. We're going to move to rural opportunity zones, and Josh, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and members of, oh, wait.
I have an agreement with them.
Fewer eyes staring at my back, I guess. A weight off my shoulders. Anyway, thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Josh Luthai. I'm presenting an audit looking at the Rural Opportunity Zones, or RAWS program. Team members on this audit were Betty Liu and Matt Fahrenbrook, and Kristen Rottinghouse managed the audit. This audit was required under KSA 46-1137. That's the statute that requires us to do economic development incentive evaluations. Our main objective in this audit was to evaluate how effective the RAWS program has been at reducing rural depopulation. We estimated the program had a limited impact on rural depopulation. However, stakeholders we spoke with told us the program benefited their communities. To unpack that, I'm going to summarize the audit in 4 parts. First, I'll talk about some background information. Then I'll talk about the results of our analysis, and that'll involve explaining how we evaluated the program's effect on rural depopulation. Third, I'll talk about what program stakeholders told us. And fourth and finally, I'll talk about some miscellaneous issues we noticed as we were doing our work. The background information I'd like to begin with starts on pages 3 and 4 of the audit. The RAWS program was created in 2011 and began operating in 2012. The program is set to sunset in 2026 unless the legislature extends the sunset as it has done a few times in the past. The program incents people to move to counties statute designates as rural opportunity zones, or RAWS counties. When the program was first created, there were 50 RAWS counties. But as of 2021, any county with a population of less than 40,000 qualified as a RAWS county. That means that today, 95 of the state's 105 counties are RAWS counties. Statute doesn't say what the RAWS program's purpose is. However, based on testimony from when the program was created, our interpretation is the program was meant to counteract rural depopulation. Depopulation is an issue rural Kansas has been dealing with for decades. To get people to move to RAWS counties, the program offers up to $15,000 in student loan repayment assistance and a 5-year 100% state income tax credit. People can get one or both benefits depending on what program criteria they meet. Commerce administers the student loan benefit, while Revenue administers the tax credit benefit. The two agencies administer their halves of the program independently. The report explains the student loan benefit on pages 4 through 9. The student loan benefit is a little tricky because it requires both RAWS counties and RAWS participants to each do certain things. But the basic idea is that a RAWS participant can get up to $3,000 per year for 5 years, $15,000 total, if they qualify for the program. So with that in mind, I'm going to start by talking about what the RAWS counties have to do, and then I'll talk about what RAWS participants have to do to get that money. State law requires RAWS counties to adopt a resolution to participate in the student loan part of RAWS. That's because RAWS counties have to agree to share the costs of participants' student loan benefits with the state. In its RAWS resolution, a county specifies how much money it will set aside for the RAWS program, and the county will then use that money to split program costs 50-50 with the state for people who move to that county and participate in the student loan benefit. Sharing costs with the state for a RAWS participant is known as sponsoring that participant. Figure 1 on page 5 shows all 95 RAWS counties and whether they've adopted RAWS resolutions. As the figure shows, only 2 counties, Chase and Jefferson, haven't yet adopted RAWS resolutions. So that's the county side of things. Let's turn then to what someone who wants to participate in the program has to do. If you want to participate in the student loan part of RAWS, you need to meet 3 criteria. You need to have some sort of college degree, such as an associate's degree, a bachelor's degree, all the way up to a doctorate. You need to have student loan debt, and you need to move to a RAWS county after it adopted a RAWS resolution. If someone does those things, they may be able to get student loan repayment assistance. To get that assistance, though, the RAWS county the person moved to needs to have funding available. So if a RAWS county is already sponsoring several people and has used up all its funding, then that county can't take on more participants. So someone might move to a RAWS county and meet program criteria, but they might not be able to get any money because that county doesn't have funds available for them. In that case, the participant has to wait for funding, and that's called being put on a wait list. Additionally, some counties pass what's called a $0 resolution. In that type of resolution, a county doesn't set aside any funding for RAWS. So that county can't sponsor any participants. But other entities in the county, like cities, employers, and foundations, can choose to participate in the program and split costs with the state instead. So that's the basics of the student loan part of RAWS. On pages 7 and 8, you can see some information about how many people participated in the program between 2012 and 2022. In that time, almost 1,700 people participated. Also in that time, the state and program sponsors spent about $13 million on student loan assistance payments to program participants. On pages 9 through 12, the report covers the tax credit benefit. The tax credit benefit is a little more straightforward than the student loan benefit. To briefly summarize, to qualify for the tax credit, you need to meet 4 criteria. You need to have lived outside of Kansas for at least 5 years. You have to have no more than $10,000 in annual Kansas source income for the time you were living outside of Kansas. You have to have lived in the RAWS County for the full year in which you want to claim the tax credit, and you have to file your taxes timely and not be delinquent on other tax payments. If you meet those criteria, then you can claim a 100% state income tax credit for up to 5 consecutive years, provided you stay in a RAWS County for those 5 years. Unlike the student loan benefit, counties don't have to pass a resolution for people to get this benefit. Pages 10 and 11 show how many people applied for the tax credit between 2012 and 2022. There were about 1,700 individuals who did so. However, most of those individuals didn't claim the credit for all 5 years. In some cases, that's because they started claiming the credit fairly recently, so they've still got a few more years to go. But in other cases, we see that people did things like moved out of state after a year or two, so they're obviously not going to claim the credit for all 5 years. And in other cases, people may have done things like not file their taxes timely, or they may have used a tax filing software that doesn't allow them to claim the credit. Also, between 2012 and 2022, participants claimed about $14 million in ROS tax credits, so that means the state gave up that much money in income tax revenues it may have otherwise collected. Finally, in terms of background information, we estimated there were about 150 people who participated in both parts of the ROS program. That is, they claimed both the tax credit and the student loan benefit. However, it's hard for us to say exactly how much overlap there was, because, as I mentioned earlier, Commerce and Revenue administer their parts of ROS independently, and there's simply not a good way to crosswalk their data sets to identify who participated in both parts. So we had to do things like compare people's names and counties of residence to estimate that overlap. Now we'll get into how we evaluated the ROS program's effects on rural depopulation and what we found. We summarize our methodology on pages 13 through 15. To summarize, we used program data from Commerce and Revenue to determine how many people participated in the ROS program in total. We then combined that data with information from Commerce's 2019 and 2021 surveys of student loan participants to estimate the average ROS participant's family size. In its surveys, Commerce asked participants about their relationship status and how many children they had. We use this to estimate average family size. Average family size is important because when someone participates in ROS and moves to a ROS county, it's not necessarily just them that moves to the ROS county. For example, if I'm married and have a child and I participate in the program, I'm not just one person moving to a ROS county, there's 3 people moving to a ROS county. And we wanted to account for that in our analyses. And as it turns out, based on the responses to Commerce's surveys, the average ROS participant's family size was 3 individuals. We also used data from Commerce's surveys to estimate whether ROS was what caused people to move to ROS counties. In the surveys, Commerce asked participants whether they would have moved to their ROS counties if the ROS program hadn't been offered. Respondents' answers to this question was important to evaluating the program's effects. If someone would have moved to a ROS county, even if they hadn't participated in the program, it doesn't make sense to credit the program with that person's move. Most survey respondents reported they would have moved to a ROS county even without the ROS program. Specifically, only 14% of student loan participants said they moved to a ROS county because of the program. Similarly, only 29% of people who participated in both the student loan and tax credit parts of ROS said they moved to a ROS county because of the program. After putting those pieces of data together, we estimated the ROS program directly caused about 1,400 individuals to move to ROS counties. That includes both participants and their family members. By contrast, based on census data, in the years after they adopted ROS resolutions, ROS counties' populations declined by about 29,000 people in total. This means ROS programs offset counties' population losses by about 5%. That's why we say the program had a limited impact on rural depopulation. However, the program did have significant effects in a few counties. If you'll join me in taking a look at Figure 4 on page 16, I'll talk you through that. The map in Figure 4 highlights in blue the counties in which ROS may have had significant effects. We estimate ROS has significant effects in 19 of the state's 95 ROS counties. In 15 counties, those in light blue, we estimate ROS decreased population losses by 10% or more. For example, between 2011 and 2022, Thomas County lost about 55 people. Without ROS, the county may have lost about 120 people. In 2 counties, Rawlins and Scott, we estimate ROS increased population gains by 10% or more. And for 2 more counties, Marshall and Nemaha, we estimate ROS may have caused those counties to gain population instead of losing it. For example, between 2013 and 2022, Nemaha County gained about 20 people. Without ROS, the county may have lost about 15 people. To recap, the ROS program had limited effects in most counties, but there are a few counties in which the program did help reduce or reverse depopulation. Now I'll move on to my third topic, which is what stakeholders had to say about the program. This material is on pages 17 and 18. We held phone surveys with 14 stakeholders to get their opinions about the program. Most were student loan sponsors, so most of this content is about how the student loan part of the program works. Here I'm going to highlight the positive things they had to say about the program and their recommendations for improving the program. In terms of positive things, 5 respondents told us 5 respondents told us RAWS helped with employee recruitment. For example, we heard RAWS helped rural communities attract people like teachers, hospital workers, attorneys, police officers, and government administrators. 5 respondents also told us RAWS was one of the few tools rural communities had to deal with workforce and population issues. Without RAWS, rural communities would have even fewer tools to combat these kinds of issues. And 2 respondents told us RAWS helped with their community development. In terms of recommendations, most respondents wanted to see better communication from the state about the program. For example, 4 told us they wanted the state to better promote the program, including the tax credit benefit, so people would be aware of and take advantage of it. 5 told us Commerce needs to communicate better with sponsors about the program and educate sponsors about how the program works. This would help combat confusion about the program. Some of the folks that we talked to were confused about how the program works. For example, one respondent told us their county thought the student loan part of the program was only for people from out of state, and it's not. However, that misunderstanding made their county reluctant to participate in the program. 5 respondents suggested expanding the program. They told us the program could offer benefits beyond student loan assistance, for example. They suggested assistance with things like childcare or housing costs. They also suggested opening the program to people with professional certifications that aren't college degrees, such as to individuals with commercial driver's licenses. And finally, 5 respondents suggested restricting the program. One respondent, for example, said RAWS participants should have to work in the county they live in. That respondent told us that RAWS participants in their county often commuted to other counties to work, and that doesn't help their county with local workforce issues. Another 3 also suggested restricting the program to either fewer counties or only to counties willing to put up funds to sponsor participants. And then for my 4th and final topic, I'd like to highlight some miscellaneous issues we noticed during our work. This is mainly on pages 19 through 21, but I'm also going to incorporate some facts from elsewhere in the report. Here I've got 5 items I'd like to hopefully briefly cover. First, as I mentioned toward the start of the presentation, Commerce allows cities, employers, and foundations to sponsor student loan participants. However, state law only talks about county participation in RAWS. It's not clear to us whether other entities, like employers and foundations, should be allowed to sponsor participants. Having those sorts of sponsors could be good if it helps increase the number of individuals the program can support. But it's not clear to us this is what the legislature intended when it created the program. Further, Commerce allows employers and foundations to choose who they'll sponsor. By contrast, counties and cities sponsor participants on a first-come, first-served basis. This has resulted in situations where participants sponsors themselves or are sponsored by a family member. For example, one business owner appeared to have used their own business to sponsor themselves. While these situations seem uncommon, we're not sure this is what the legislature intended with regard to these kinds of sponsorships. Additionally, if RAWS isn't what caused these individuals to move to a RAWS county, then these individuals are essentially leveraging a state match on student loan payments they would have made anyway. Second, some individuals spend a long time waiting for student loan repayment assistance. Like I said toward the start of the presentation, if you're eligible for student loan benefits, but there's no funding available for you, you have to wait. And some people have waited for a very long time. If you take a look at Figure 5 on page 20, you'll see, for example, that at the time of our review, there were about 5 people who applied for student loan repayment assistance in 2012 who were still waiting for funding. During our work, we also identified another individual who applied in 2012 that didn't start getting assistance payments until 2020. This shows that some people are waiting 8 to 10 years, if not more, for assistance. Third, a lot of participants don't complete the program. This is also in Figure 5. As that figure shows in the 2 rightmost columns, less than half of the program's participants generally completed the program. Part of this is that some participants withdraw or are disqualified from the RAWS program. About 560 of the roughly 1,700 student loan participants withdrew or were disqualified from the program. State law requires a participant to be disqualified if they leave the RAWS county they moved to. So we're concerned this lack of program completion and the disqualifications and withdrawals may mean the RAWS program isn't keeping participants in rural Kansas. We also looked at a small sample of 26 tax credit participants to see if they stayed in RAWS counties after claiming the tax credit. And as of 2022, 17 of those 26 participants had left Kansas and 1 had moved to a non-RAWS county. That means only 8 of the 26 participants we looked at stayed in a RAWS county after claiming the tax credit. That's additional evidence that RAWS doesn't always keep participants in rural Kansas. For this and other reasons, we may be overestimating the effects of the RAWS program. Fourth, the student loan part of RAWS appears to be moving people around rural Kansas rather than to rural Kansas. We found about 660 student loan participants, or about 40% of all student loan participants, moved between counties that had become RAWS eligible by 2021. This isn't against program rules, and it may help if it keeps people in rural Kansas when they otherwise would have left. However, shifting people between RAWS counties doesn't help increase the state's overall rural population, and it also means that one county's loss is another county's gain. And fifth and finally, no other states have programs like RAWS. There are, however, some similar local programs. To wrap this all up then, if we look at only the data, then we see that RAWS has had limited effects on rural depopulation. Statewide, RAWS offset about 5% of rural counties' population losses. That said, RAWS did have some significant effects in a minority of RAWS counties. However, RAWS stakeholders told us the program was important for their communities. While the program may not cause lots of people to move to rural Kansas, it may have other benefits for rural communities. For example, people who get benefits under RAWS may have more money to spend in their communities. They may be more likely to do things like buy houses or open businesses, and those things can all benefit rural communities. And as I mentioned earlier, stakeholders told us that RAWS was one of the few tools their communities had. The challenge here is in determining what the program should be doing or what constitutes success. So we recommended the legislature consider amending statute to clarify the program's goals, including specifying benchmarks for program success. That's at the bottom of page 21. We also recommended the legislature consider clarifying whether cities, employers, and foundations should be allowed to serve as sponsors. And finally, we recommended Commerce and Revenue develop a way to identify individuals who participated in both parts of RAWS. Both agencies agreed to implement the recommendation. And finally, you can find Commerce's official response to the audit on pages 22 and 23. With that, I would be happy to stand for questions.
All right, committee, any questions for Josh? Representative Sawyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay, I'm going to look at the tax credit piece. Okay, you said the survey said that only 29% of the respondents who took the tax credit along with the student loan reimbursement said they would not have moved to the county. I mean, they would not have moved to the county unless they had the tax credit.
Correct. 29% said they would not have moved if they didn't have those benefits.
So 71% would have moved anyway.
Yes.
Okay. And then on page 12, your chart shows the tax credit claimant. So if I read this right, the last full year we have is 2021.
Mm-hmm.
So only 400 people in the entire state claim the tax credit?
Correct. Yes.
That's it. Okay. And of those 400, only 29% said they would. I mean, if we use the 29% number, that means only 116 of 400 would have moved to that, right? Needed the tax credit to move to the county.
Yes, if I can clarify a few things, though, about the figure in our methodology. So in figure 3, the number of tax credit claimants, that's the number of claimants per year. Some of those people claim it in multiple years, though. So for example, somebody who claimed the credit in 2018 through 2022 would be represented in all 5 of those years. So there's some double counting going on here if you count up all the numbers and sum them. To your point, though, yes, we did generalize survey results. So our assumption is that about 29% of all the tax credit claimants, well, let me back up. There is no survey data that deals specifically with individuals who claimed only the tax credit. Commerce only surveys student loan participants and the individuals who also happen to be taking the tax credit. So we assumed that people who only claim the tax credit would have results similar to those who only took the student loan benefit because the value of those benefits on an annual basis is pretty similar. So for the tax credit only claimants, it's more likely that percentage would be lower and closer to 14%.
So it's even lower. Okay. So out of the 95 counties, assuming the 29%, we're talking 116 people. So barely 1 per county on average.
I would have to double check that, but I believe that's correct.
And then, based on what you said in your other conclusion, 68% of those people don't even stay. They end up leaving at some point.
We don't want to generalize the results of that tax credit data review to everybody, but it does suggest that not all tax credit claimants stay in those RAWS counties. I can't say exactly how many leave, but it's not 0.
Okay, but we only have 1. We kind of start off with we start off with barely 1 per county, and after they leave, it's kind of less than 1 per county. I guess it looks to me the tax credit piece, at least $14 million, isn't really keeping people in rural Kansas or getting them to rural Kansas, based on your charts here. We're only talking 400 even take it in the entire state, and then 29% said, only 29% said they needed to go to the county, and 68% of the people leave. It doesn't really sound like it's doing much.
I don't want to weigh in on whether the program is worth it, so to speak, but no, our conclusion is the program's effects seem fairly limited for most counties.
All right, thank you.
$26 million for 1,400 people seems pretty expensive. Any other questions? Senator Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just looking on that figure 5 on page 20, it looks like this thing peaked in 2013, 2014, and by pretty much every metric, it's been slipping ever since. So, I mean, do you have any idea of, it's just not doing its job, apparently?
Yeah, we talked to Commerce a little bit about the application numbers, and their thought was that this program was most known about, most promoted, most attractive when it was newest, which would explain the large number of applications earlier on. And then since then, yes, the application numbers for the student loan benefit have slipped. That may also have been impacted by things like people getting worried about whether the program will sunset or issues like COVID more recently.
It looks like with regard to the COVID, between 2018 and 2019, there was a huge drop off, and that's before COVID actually hit. So I could understand the COVID years perhaps, but prior to COVID, it really took a significant dive, 2018 to 2019, particularly on the number of completed the program, the number of applicants.
I'd have to double check, but 2019, 2018, that period may have been when the ROS program was set to sunset. So I think some counties did not pass resolutions which restricted the number of participants. And then when they saw the sunset was extended, they say, oh, well, we're back in, which opens the door, of course. It doesn't appear that applications are really recovered. And then I'd also caution you against reading too much into the completion numbers for more recent years, because a lot of those folks are going to be still in the process of getting payments. They can't have completed the program if they haven't been around for 5 years. And if you have to wait a long time, that also delays how long it's going to take you to complete the program.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Tyson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I noticed that Kansas is the only state that has a program like this. And I know that one of the programs, we're the only state that has a Star Bonds program also. It seems to me like if there was a pattern in constructive development, other states would be picking this up, as with the Star Bonds. Maybe we need to look at both of those programs this session. Thank you.
Representative Francis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So one of the things that I read through on this, and it's, I don't know, it may be anecdotal, but there was never any original objectives for this program. So we make an assumption that it's to limit population losses in rural Kansas, which I think are often very secular. Are there other states that have programs that are somewhat similar to this, except they're more targeted towards the recruiting and retention of high-need professions? Like I know, again, this is anecdotal from what I've seen, the counties that use this successfully are the ones that target it for educators, target it for healthcare workers. Did you look at any other states that maybe had programs along the lines of ROS that targeted those high-need professions?
We didn't look at programs that targeted high-need professions because we didn't think they were similar to ROS. For us, the main identifying sort of characteristic of ROS is it's trying to get people to go to rural areas. So we were looking for programs that were focused on getting people to rural areas.
So you're telling me that no other states have programs that are set up to attract professionals to rural areas?
Not on a statewide basis. I want to be cautious here because there are some local programs that do those sorts of things. So for example, on page 21, we learned about in Alabama, an economic development organization. It's not like a state organization. It's not a statewide thing that runs a program to attract individuals specifically to Northwest Alabama. So the issue is there don't appear to be statewide, state-administered programs like ROS. There may very well be smaller local programs that target high-need professions.
I just sometimes think this program suffers from a focus. You know, some of the things, you know, it's very, I have 2 children that didn't return to my rural county because they want to live in the Johnson County area. And I do think programs like this can encourage people that are on the cusp to return to the areas that we struggle to recruit, again, those types of professions. Thank you.
Representative Probst.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm looking at page 19 and around the middle of the page. I'm finding myself curious about it. It looks like there's a couple of examples of, I think, if we were not talking about business incentives, when we were talking about people getting assistance, we'd call it fraud. But I'm curious about how many examples of that we saw in the state. It's kind of vague, but it looks like businesses were basically paying for themselves to get the tax credits, sponsoring themselves or using foundations to do that. And I'm curious about how often that was found.
So for this section, we're talking about the student loan benefit, not the tax credit benefit. So what's basically happening in these situations is individuals or their family members are paying half of the student loan benefit cost, and the state is matching the other half. In terms of how many times we saw this wasn't something that we looked specifically for. However, we saw 2 employers for which this seemed like it might have been an issue, and then we were also told about a couple other situations with the family sponsorship situation. So no evidence is widespread, but we did want to flag it for your all's attention in case it was not what you intended to have happen.
So I noticed that too. And when did we do that? When did we make that change? Because I can remember several years ago there was a waiting list that was longer than this. That's obviously a rules and regulation because it's not in statute. So when did that? Has that always been in place that we allowed businesses to sponsor rather than a county?
I don't believe it's always been in place. Commerce would be able to tell you exactly when that happened. It's not a super recent change, though. I think it's been going on for a few years at least.
It was,
Senator Tyson.
Mr. Chairman, it was the representative from Montgomery County that requested that change. And so he left the legislature in 2020, I think, or 2022. You guys know who I'm talking about.
Yeah, but then when you look at the numbers, we're still dropping. I mean, we didn't get, not a whole lot of people use the student loan program since that changed. And so, all right. I've been a critic of this program since I got here. I haven't liked it at all. I've spoken to the secretary about it a few times. I think, I can't speak for the secretary, but I think he's on the same page. We don't want to take the program away because it's doing some good, and we've got to continue to do everything we can for rural Kansas. But if anyone has any good ideas to replace this program, I'm all ears, and I'm sure the secretary would be all over it as well, because $26 million for 1,400 people is not a good ROI. We'll never get those dollars back, and this program doesn't seem to be one that actually attracts people to rural Kansas. We really need to find something that can help rural Kansas. And so I don't care, it doesn't matter what it costs. We need to do it right, though. I'm not seeing any further questions. The Department of Commerce is here if you have any questions for them, or did you want to address this at all? No? Any questions? Representative Probst.
This may be for Commerce. Several years ago, I was partly involved in a kind of ad hoc committee that was looking at the RAWS program. Did we produce a draft out of that or any recommendations out of that?
Good afternoon. I'm Tricia Purdon. I run the Office of Rural Prosperity. Yes, that report did come out. The recommendations really covered housing, childcare, and to also address the need to add lower degrees, technical certifications, lower than associates, so that they could target specific professions such as welders, electricians, home builders, et cetera. It also requested that students that go away to college but retain their home address would be allowed to still come back after they finished their college degree and come back. So those were the 4 recommendations that committee put together.
Tricia, while you're up there, do you remember, I think it was 7 years or 6 years ago, we had a program that seemed to get some traction, never passed because we had some conflicting opinions on the Commerce Committee, but it was called the Ad Astra Rural Bill. Do you recall what that was about at all?
Vaguely, I wasn't at Commerce at that time, but I believe it was a program that really intended to allow extreme flexibility for communities to really administer what they needed on their local level. I don't think it quite worked the same way RAWS does, but more similar to what we've done with the SEED program or HEAL program now, where we target a certain area of a town and we want them to improve upon that community, but they get to decide how they want to fund those dollars.
I just remember that it was looked at as a replacement for RAWS, and so I liked it, but I didn't really know what it was about. So, any other questions? All right, seeing none. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Okay, moving on to the next audit. Kansas African American Affairs Commission.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Katrin Osterhaus. I'll be presenting this audit. Kristen Ridinghouse was the manager on this. The presentation will cover the limited scope audit on the Kansas African American Affairs Commission. You should have the report in your packet. The question we answered is shown near the top of page 2. Did the Kansas African American Affairs Commission comply with key legal requirements and make appropriate expenditures last year? The short answer is, we found that the Commission did not comply with 3 key requirements related to its duties and did not always get pre-approval for selected fiscal year 2023 expenditures. So before I begin to explain those details, let me begin with some background information. And that information starts on page 4 if you follow along. The Commission is one of 3 liaison officers within the Governor's office. And by law, the Commission consists of 7 commissioners, 4 of which are selected by legislative leadership, and 3 are selected by the Governor. The Commission has an executive director, currently the only paid position. If you flip to page 5, figure 1 shows the Commission had about $130,000 in total expenditures, and nearly 2/3 of that consist of salaries and benefits for that position I mentioned. Other regular expenditures were computer expenditures and rent. So to answer the first question, or the first part of the question that related to key legal requirements, and given that this was a limited scope audit, we selected 6 meeting-related duties and 3 staffing-related duties contained in relevant statutes and bylaws. This included things like checking that the Commission met 4 times a year and whether the commissioners were appointed according to statutory requirements. We found the Commission did not comply with 2 meeting-related requirements. On page 7, the first section of figure 2 shows the items we selected for the audit. The 2 non-compliant items are indicated with an X rather than a check mark. Specifically, we found the Commission did not elect a chairperson and a secretary in fiscal year 2023, and it also did not have standing subject matter committees at the time of our audit. We also found that the way that the executive director was appointed was inconsistent with statute. So while the statute says the Commission appoints, the executive director and the Governor approves the selection, this process essentially was reversed and flipped for this particular executive director. And while that is how the last executive director also was chosen, it does not match the process outlined in statute. We also checked whether the commissioners and the executive director performed various functions, powers, and duties outlined in statute. So looking at the middle portion of figure 2, you will see 11 functions, powers, and duties that the Commission has. For example, gather and disseminate information and conduct hearings, conferences, and special studies. We reviewed various activities that the commissioners carried out. We found the Commission had conducted activities related to 5 of those 11 items. We did not identify this as a problem because the law does not specify those 11 items as duties alone, but in fact adds functions and powers, which gives a little bit of breathing room and makes it non-mandatory. We found the executive director compliant with the 5 statutory duties that were outlined, which is reflected in the bottom part of Figure 2. If you move with me to page 10, we noted the distinction between the role of the director and the commissioners is blurred. It is unclear whether the director or the commissioners are responsible for deciding on and conducting specific activities. The director told us she's responsible for much of the commission's activities and wasn't comfortable asking commissioners to do certain things because they are not paid. Other documents also showed the commissioners took more of a passive role. Next, I'll cover the financial compliance part of the audit, which starts on page 10. At a high level, the Commission's fiscal year 2023 expenditures seemed reasonable to accomplishing its duties. Earlier, I mentioned that much of the Commission's expenditures are for regular, routine expenditures. Those expenditures are handled by the Governor's office directly, and so there's very little involvement that the Commission or the Director has with those. For the 11 months of the expenditures we did review, only 7% were for non-routine expenditures. So things like consulting fees, job-related training, office hospitality, those types of things. When the Commission has a request for non-regular activity with such costs, policies are such that the Director must get an activity pre-approved by the Governor's office in writing. That typically involves an email with necessary documentation. Once the expenses occurred, the Executive Director must supply necessary documentation for the Governor's office to approve the expense and to initiate payment through the state's accounting system. We selected 11 non-routine expenditures, which covered almost all of those non-routine expenses in the time period we studied. And we found 6 of those expenditures lacked the written pre-approval I just mentioned is supposed to happen. If you flip to page 12, Figure 3 summarizes our results graphically. So for example, the last item, a fundraiser sponsorship for the African American Museum, did not have a written pre-approval. The last finding I want to direct your attention to is on page 13. Commissioners told us they had insufficient financial awareness and oversight, in part because the Executive Director has not shared relevant information. We say that because we saw no discussions regarding the Commission's budget status or planned expenditures during the Commission meetings. In addition, commissioners responding to a survey we conducted told us they generally did not have sufficient oversight over its financial management. Further, several respondents stated they had not received a written budget, financial report, or any other overview of financial transactions. We noted a potential issue for further consideration dealing with what appeared to be excessive fees for OITS, computer programming, and communication services, and that information is on page 15. We made 5 recommendations to ensure the Commission becomes compliant with various laws and bylaws, and to improve the communication and collaboration between the Director and the Commission. Those recommendations start on page 14. The Director rejected the recommendation on training for travel expenditures, but said other recommendations will be addressed. We provided a draft report to the Governor's Office and the Commission Director. The Governor's Office disagreed with several findings, and page 16 of the report enumerates why we decided to not make any changes in the report itself. And with that, I stand for questions.
Okay, committee, any questions? Representative Penn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. Ossoff, for you and your team conducting this abbreviated audit into the Kansas African American Affairs Commission. I really do appreciate it. Quick question. It says on, let's see, which page is this? It says on page 8 that the governor appointed the director on May 28th, 2021. So there would be a list of expenditures, the chart that you have here, that's on page 12. Does it encompass everything from May 28th, 2021 to present?
Let me digest your question just a little bit. So the items identified on page 12 are most of the non-regular expenditures. There's, I believe, 2 or 3 others that we decided to put aside. I think one was for cell phones. So those are the non-regular activities and items that we decided to pull, which is almost all of them. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question,
No,
or
it's
if
just,
there's more to it.
just asking from the beginning of the current executive director's time on May 28th, 2021, as you list on page 8.
No, no,
I
so
don't have
what,
dates on page 12. Yeah.
so sorry. Yes, so to clarify, this is the first 11 months of fiscal year 2023. When we did conduct the audit, it was right around that time when the fiscal year was almost done, but we did not have that last month. So this is really only out of the first 11 months of fiscal year 2023.
Okay, so nothing prior to that was examined, okay. So you didn't have access to any of the expenditure reports or anything like that?
We would have, but it was a limited scope, and we didn't do anything else.
Thank you so very much. Let's see. And when you all investigated or took a look at, on page 6, it talks about that the commission didn't comply with 2 of the 6 meeting-related duties outlined in the law. It has bullets down here talking about that they did not elect a new chairperson and they didn't have the standing committees. Did they have those prior to the window that you looked at? Was that a question that you all asked?
So with regard to the chairperson and secretary, there was one elected in the previous year. The problem here was that every year it's supposed to be an election for a chairperson and secretary. In fact, the requirement is such that it should happen in the last meeting of a fiscal year. And we noted that last meeting came and went and no new elections took place. So they didn't follow the instructions to select an annual, to re-elect, basically. They have since done that, is my understanding, and that election essentially went to the same chairperson.
Okay. And Mr. Chairman, if I may, on page 15, you said that it's paragraph number 5 of your recommendations. It says that there's, at the bottom, that there is no documentation of any commissioner expressing confusion or requesting clarification of procedures. I guess the question that I have is, how did they come up with that particular response? Because it seems to be woven into some of your responses. Did they look at emails or look at their, with Coma Core rules, their meetings are televised or recorded. Did you all inspect that as well?
We looked at all meetings, read through all meetings. With respect to the answer on page 15, that is the answer that came from the executive director, so I cannot comment further. This is her response, and it is not influenced by us at all.
And Mr. Chairman, I just have 2 other quick questions, and then I'll yield. Number 1 would be, will you say that this was, I think the findings is that the current executive director was put into the position based off of what the previous executive director's procedure was? Where'd you get that information from?
We got that information from interviews and also from newspaper information, essentially, that we knew that that was exactly how the last executive director was selected. And in fact, we were told that was why it happened, but of course we don't know why it happened the way it did, but we were told the other person was done the same way.
Who told you that?
I would have to check my notes. I can do that.
You could let the committee know. I'd appreciate that. And then the final question, Mr. Chairman, deals with, we're talking about on page number 13, at the top it says we saw evidence from the governor's office that they didn't provide official written approval and that they may have, but not definitively, may have verbally discussed some of the planned activities and the expenditure of the funds, some of them totaling things that stuck out $1,500 for professional fees is kind of ambiguous what exactly that means. I wish that the executive director or the chairman were here to stand for questions. The question that I have here when we're talking about your write-up in your report, Madam, is that you say that sometimes if they haven't had the opportunity to vote on these items that have been approved for expenditure, it might mean that the commission didn't know about it prior to approval. So how was the executive director authorized, in your estimation, to make said expenditures if they don't have votes, minutes approving these expenditures?
To take it one step at a time, so there are minutes. We saw a number of those types of activities certainly discussed. I would not go so far as saying that we have noted there were no votes on certain things. If they were discussed and not in the minutes, we wouldn't know because all we have is the minutes. Does that answer everything, or were there pieces I'm missing?
No, for the most part, it does. Just one other quick question. Down at the bottom of 13, it says that the executive director told us when we talked to her about the monthly budget information, she told us that she had not shared that information with the commissioners. Is that customary in what you all see from LPA on how the good governance and stewardship of taxpayer funds are done here in Kansas?
I would not want to comment on what is customary. I haven't done audits like this in a while.
All right. Thank you, Madam. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, any further questions? Senator Ware.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Not a question, but a concern. This audit, as opposed to any others that I have memory of, has focused on one individual rather than a group, a department, an agency, a program. And it gives me pause. It makes me concerned that the good work of this committee for, as I read in the mission, oversight, insight, and foresight, that we might unfortunately be moving from neutral fact-finding to a popularity rating on individuals. And that is a concern for me. Thank you.
Okay, well, I can see that they do talk about one or two people in this. It's because that they were the leader of this commission. The question does not ask anything about an individual. It asks about the African American Affairs Commission. And naturally, whoever the leader is of that commission would be the one that answers the questions, and that would be my explanation, at least, on why there was one individual called out in the report. Senator Tyson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And is there anybody from the commission that's here to answer questions on the report? No one. Okay, that is quite disappointing. This is quite concerning, and I would ask, this may be a question for the revisers, who's responsible for oversight of these commissions to make sure that they are adhering to state statute? And we can take it offline and get an email, because I'm wondering if there's other commissions out there that may have similar issues. But this seems very egregious, and I thank the good representative for bringing it to the committee.
Representative Penn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In response to the earlier comment about targeting any individuals, there are no individuals named. This is about the functionality of the commission and the roles of the officials therein. I bring your attention, Mr. Chairman, and the committee to page 10. At the top of page 10, LPA, and Madam, you can speak on this as well. The distinction between the role of the director and the commissioners is unclear. There appears to be a blurred understanding on who is responsible for deciding on and conducting specific activities. You say in here that the executive director told you that they see themselves as being the one to execute a number of the activities. A number of these activities, as you've established in your report, are expenditures that don't have votes with it and they don't have reports with it because that person fulfilling that role of executive director has not revealed those things. So one of the things I think that we're supposed to do in the legislature is also not only to have oversight of executive agencies, but also look out for the taxpayer dollars. And if how much is it, Madam, is on the budget for this particular commission? I didn't see that.
The entire budget for the committee?
Yes, please.
Commission, sorry, is 130,000. It's a little bit more now in the next fiscal year.
And was there extra funding that came in outside of state general funds?
There was. If you look at page 4, we are discussing a $50,000 grant that came in. That grant does not have a timeline. What you see with $130,000 is the full amount that does include what was spent. And some of the $50,000 was spent in fiscal year 2022, which is what this figure shows, 2022 expenditures.
So that's $130,000 from SGF plus a $50,000 from the Was this the Kansas Health Foundation grant? Is that correct?
So fiscal year 2022, total 130,000, of which 19,400 came from that fund.
Yeah, I think a proper accounting of those funds is something that is well within our purview to ask for. The only other question that I would say there, did you have any communication, since they didn't want, were they notified of this presentation today, the commission?
Yes.
The executive director and the chairman, or members and all, or?
Yes.
Each of them, all of them?
The commission, executive director and the chair received invitation to the executive director. Both got the preliminary draft.
Did they respond to you, madam, as to why they're not here?
The executive director declined to participate.
And the chairman? And the chairman?
The chair was able to attend. We did not invite an invitation to speak, but information about the meeting definitely was conveyed.
I look forward to speaking with both of them. There are some questions that I have for them that you won't be able to answer, but I really appreciate your time and your help on this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Probst.
I guess I do have a question or maybe a statement or some combination of both. I remember when we approved this audit, I was a little perplexed. It seemed very specific, and it almost felt like there was something we were looking for. I am confused why we're scrutinizing, not that it's not important, but we're effectively talking about $110,000 of state money, and we're combing through this and having auditors do a 100-hour audit, and I'm curious if there's more to the story that I might provide some context to me about why we're doing this.
Senator Corson.
You know, I'll just say for me, I feel like this has just been a massive conflict of interest from the very beginning. I mean, we've got Representative Penn's wife is a member of the commission. So that was not disclosed to us at all. When we considered this audit, that was not disclosed. When he proposed this audit, he didn't disclose that to this committee when we were considering it, that, hey, my spouse is a member of this commission. I've drafted this audit proposal. I would like you to consider it, but doesn't include, but by the way, my spouse is actually a member of this commission. Then his spouse presumably gets to be interviewed and air her grievances about the commission. As a member of the commission, gets to be interviewed by LPA. And then Representative Penn gets to sit on the committee and ask questions about the audit he proposed without proper disclosure that involves comments and information provided by his spouse. I mean, this whole thing for me has just smelled wrong from the get-go. I think it's sort of beneath the committee, and to me has been just a really disappointing episode in our committee. For us to do this without proper disclosures and sort of going after this relatively small particular committee and trying to think that we were going to unearth some great wrongdoing. It's always smelled wrong to me, Representative, and hopefully that maybe sheds a little bit of reason why. Thank you.
Representative Penn.
Well, I would say that the same that, let me ask you this question, madam, since you're still in the hot seat. How did you find out who the commissioners are on this particular commission?
I believe I asked the executive director for a list. I'm looking at Kristen. We also had emails ahead of time. So we had emails somewhere.
And did you ever investigate, or in the conduct of your audit, did you take a look at their Facebook page, Twitter page, or website?
And the commissioners itself?
Did you look at the commission's Facebook page, Twitter page, or website?
Yes, almost every day.
Almost every day. And did you see who the commissioners were on the Twitter page, Facebook page, and the commission website by the state?
I don't recall at the moment, no.
They're all listed down the side with pictures and bios and everything, too. I would recommend to the good senator, number one, I never spoke on this when we presented because that wasn't the question that was asked of me. It was presented by the LPA. It was not for me to speak on. I wasn't called to speak. So I'm pretty sure that's why you didn't hear me speak. But had you called me. I have no problem telling you about my wife. I understand that the Senate President, Ty Masterson, appointed my wife to that position for the 4th Congressional District in July of last year, about the time that this particular scope takes place. So if there were any irregularities, I would say that, you know, those types of things have come to the forefront since she's been on there. And that's why my first question was, how far back does this go? Because there are irregularities that we heard about from the community and from other commissioners, even prior to my wife being appointed to replace an elderly gentleman. But I do appreciate your concern. I'll help you with your olfactory sensitivities as far as things smelling. Perhaps we can talk about that offline as well. Thanks.
All right, so I, for one, was aware that Patrick Penn's wife was on the commission, and that's where some of these concerns came from. I didn't see a conflict with it, but I guess we could have called on him. But I don't even know. I don't recall if Patrick Penn was even in the room. But yeah, no, I was fully aware of it, and I think other members were too. And I think everybody was aware of it when we voted. But Representative Sawyer.
Yeah, I just want to get back to the numbers. The entire general fund budget for this agency is $110,000. $83,000 of that's for the salaries, $10,000 is for the rent, $12,000 is for the computers. So basically, there's like $4,800 left of discretionary expenditure, which basically is probably for the commissioners' travel to go to the meetings. So the other expenditures we're talking about are really from their grant. It really, I mean, it's really not dealing with the general fund. So that I'm looking from that standpoint. I don't really see that there's anything here from the expenditure side, but you know, it is important they follow statutes and procedures and elect their people right. And I'm glad they got that done.
I would point out also that there were other members of the community that came forward before this audit was asked for. And so it wasn't just coming from one individual. So if you Google it, there's lots of YouTube videos out there. Several people sent me several of them before this audit was ordered. There have been a few since. I'd encourage you to go look at some of the concerns that the community has, and which is why the audit was ordered in the first place. But I'm glad it's behind us personally, so we can move on. I don't see any other questions or comments, so we will move on. Looks like we're on the consent calendar, and we'll call on Kristen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. So on today's consent calendar, there are a few different things. The first of which is approval of the minutes from your last meeting, which was July 6th. You will see those in attachment A of the court. I think it's tab B. I didn't look at that beforehand, sorry. Is it tab B? Tab A, okay. In tab A, attachment A, that's where you'll find the minutes from the July meeting. And then the other thing on today's consent calendar is acceptance of the performance audits that were presented today. So that includes the audit looking at work from home options, Rural Opportunity Zones Program, and the African American Affairs Commission limited scope. So unless there's an objection from the committee, those items would be considered approved by the post-audit committee and recorded in the meeting minutes.
Okay, anybody is welcome to abstain on approval of the minutes if you weren't present at the last meeting, and that would be only one individual. And is there a motion to object to any of the consent calendar items? Seeing none. All items are approved automatically. Next meeting date is, Chris, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If you'll turn to tab B in your binder, there's a one-page sheet of upcoming meetings. I should have specified the next date is actually October 10th. So if you want to jot down the number 10 there, it will be basically a noon meeting for an hour. The audit for that day is the K through 12 cost study, which is the last of the K through 12 statutorily required audits. a few IT security items, and then some operational items such as the full committee approving our annual budget, considering any proposed legislation, and kicking off my evaluation by you all. After that, we normally have a meeting in December. Looking ahead, it looks like audits coming around that time will be fiscal notes, 911, which is a contracted audit, 2 economic development incentive evaluations, angel investor, and a memo with all of the newly created incentives. There were 11. And hopefully community college athletics, that one is kind of TBD. We're running into a little bit of data issue there. After that, unscheduled, but future audits coming, IT security audit part 2, and then CAPERS 3, DEI spending, motor vehicle taxes, TIF districts, TANF, housing resources, and a limited scope on the commerce database. That's it. So the next meeting, October 10th.
All right, so committee, if anyone has a conflict on October 10th, please get with me right away so we can decide if there's a lot of members that have a conflict, and if there are. Representative Sawyer?
Yeah, I think we're flexible. Yesterday, Administrative Rules and Regs said October 10th, yeah. Oh, noon. We could,
Mr. Chairman, we do have rules and regs scheduled for October 10th. It impacts a couple of the members.
All right, let me get with the rules and regs chair, figure out how long that meeting is going to take. We may delay the meeting later in the day so that we can all make it, but I won't start without you. Representative Francis.
Mr. Chair, I've got a interim that day also. I don't know whether I can make it work or not if you choose to have it then, but it's an all-day one.
Okay, thanks. I'll take it into consideration. A lot of material there, sorry. All right. Just watch your calendars. We'll see if we can make it work out because every member is valuable. We want to make sure as many people can be here as possible. So with that, we're adjourned.